Hi, and welcome again. We have now with us Shruti from Amnify. We'll be talking about Internet of Things, right, Shruti?
Right.
So I just want to reinforce the idea that if you have questions for Shruti, please leave those questions on Umbrella on the streaming chat, and I will relay those questions to Shruti. Shruti, are you ready to start?
Yes, good to go.
So please introduce yourself, and the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Shruti, and I am a developer advocate at Amnify. And I've been living in Berlin for 5 years now. I still don't speak a lot of Deutsch, but that's Berlin. And I just love the city. I love the I don't give a damn attitude of the city. I love that how it's different than many other German cities I've visited. And I love that every district, it's like a region of its own. It's a microcosm. And like I said, it's different from every other city. And so one thing that I've seen in this city is their love for currywurst. And this is something I'm really fond of. And one day I was just having currywurst, and I thought, currywurst is a lot like LTE-M and NB-IoT. And I know it sounds super crazy and it's very far-fetched, but I'm going to get to it. So today I'm going to talk about why LTE-M and NB-IoT is the currywurst your IoT solution needs. And so that I don't sound super crazy, I'm going to tell it to you in 2 parts. So the first part, I'm just going to talk about what the hell is currywurst, what is LTE-M, what is NB-IoT, what am I talking about? And then I'll get to the connection that currywurst has because of its origin story and how LTE-M and NB-IoT can be useful for your IoT solutions. So hope you're not hungry because I'm going to show you what currywurst is. So currywurst is this amazing dish, which is basically chopped up sausages or wurst. And it comes with a really nice curry ketchup sauce. And it's like trenched in ketchup and it's sprinkled with curry powder on top of it. You can eat it with fries. It's like a to take away with you kind of snack. And you get it in like most cities in Germany, most famously in Berlin. And so that's basically your currywurst. It's a really nice snack. You should definitely try when you come here. And then what is LTE-M? So the Wikipedia definition would be LTE-M is this long-term evolution machine type communication standard. It's a LPWAN radio technology standard. It comes from LTE itself. And it was developed in 2016 specifically for machine-to-machine and IoT device cellular communication. And it was mainly done to focus on better coverage, better battery life, and to reduce the cost of, in general, LTE modules. And then its sister or its brother, let's say, is NB-IoT. So what is then NB-IoT? So then NB-IoT is also the LPWAN standard, which was also derived from LTE, but it was mostly driven by Huawei. So it came from the Asian part of the innovation in it. And it was also made for Internet of Things and then cellular communication for those. But the focus again was, of course, on cost and coverage, but specifically for indoor coverage and for high density connections, right? And now you might ask, okay, fine, LTE-M and NB-IoT all provide cellular communication. So why can't I just take a device, a tracking device or whatever, my IoT device, and just put a SIM card in it? So why can't I just take any SIM card that I use on my phone and use it, right? Why do I need specifically LTE-M? Why do I care if it's over 2G, 3G or whatever? And so the answer is yes, you can do it. Even right now, a lot of tracking devices are still running on normal SIM cards that you would use in your phone. They adjust the data plans or whatever, and then they use it. And it still works. But then this is where the Currywurst origin story ties in. And I'll tell you why exactly we need LTE-M by telling you why we need Currywurst. So let's go back to Currywurst. So if you take any like typical German meal, whichever part of Germany, it basically consists of some kind of a wurst. And I hope you're not hungry right now. I know this is super tempting. So a German meal would consist of some kind of a wurst, some kind of sausages. And these sausages need to be cooked really nice, right? So they need to be juicy inside. They need to be really like have the crust outside. You have some kind of potatoes with it. So if it's mashed potatoes, they need to be fluffy. They need to be creamy, no lumps. You also have sauerkraut with it. And I have no idea how or what sauerkraut comes from, but you have it. And this is like the typical meal you would have. And think of this as the LTE of it. So the way you would have this meal is you would sit down on a table with your family, you have a nice meal, you talk over it, you have the cutlery, you have the knives and the forks and spoons, and nothing wrong with that, right? You have the whole meal there and nothing wrong with that. But then remember, I told you Berlin is weird. Berlin is different from every other German city I've seen. And the diversity of the city comes from a lot of factors. And because there's people from everywhere in Berlin. And one of the factors is after the war, Berlin was occupied by different troops. So you had the Soviet troops in the east of Berlin, you had the French troops in the south, and then the west had like American and British troops. And so basically Allied troops occupied the space, and they were also helping build the city with a lot of laborers. And so money was tight, and these laborers needed something to eat. And so there was this lady called Herta Heuwer. I always say her name wrong, sorry. So there was this lady called Herta Heuwer, and she had this one small little shop, imbiss, whatever you might call it, and she used to sell sausages. And one day because of some exchange with the soldiers, she happened to get her hands on ketchup, which came from the American troops. And then she borrowed some curry powder from the British troops, because of course, curry powder is British, right? So she borrowed this, and she made like a really nice sauce out of it, like a really tasty one. She patented that sauce. She chopped up the sausages. It took less time to cook them when you chop them up, so slice them up. So she chopped up the sausages, she poured the sauce over it, she poured like curry powder on top, and gave birth to Currywurst. She also patented the sauce here. And this is basically the story of Currywurst. Now, what did Herta do? What Herta did was she adapted to the requirements of the time and of the place. She knew that the laborers needed something cost effective, something cheap, because money was tight around that time, right? So she needed something cheap to sell. She also wanted to make some money, but then she needed something to sell quite cheap. It had to be made quickly. It had to be made quickly, sold quickly, eaten quickly. You didn't have time for like fancy sit down meals. You didn't have time for like a knife and a fork and a spoon and whatnot. And so all of it had to be made quickly. And then it still had to give nutrition, like it had to have proteins, it had to have carbs, whatever you need to go through with the day. So what Herta did was the adapting to the requirements process, where she listened to the customers, she listened to what they wanted, she listened to the use case, and she gave an amazing dish which had all the three specific requirements. And again, nothing wrong with the bratwurst meal. It's good on its own. It's really delicious, but when you come to this situation, it didn't work, and something like Currywurst really worked. So that's where, let's say, you tied down to what happened with LTE-M and NB-IoT. So we can take a look at initially what LTE is. So you might probably be using it in your phones, like you might see LTE, where you see the range of your SIM card. So LTE is basically the standard for long-term evolution. It is a wireless broadband communication standard. It was again developed by 3GPP. And it is used for connection of mobile devices, data terminals, and then for data transfer and etc. And it was developed on top of other, like the preceding technologies, because it wanted to focus on speed. We needed to get high speed. And some people might link it to 4G, but it's not quite 4G. It does not fulfill the requirements of 4G communication, but you could call it like, for some time, they also call it like 3.5G or something like that. But yeah, that was LTE. And LTE, you mainly use it for critical systems if you think about IoT. So critical systems like, let's say, smart mobility, surveillance, and let's say smart power, smart energy, and then those kind of use cases. What you need is low latency. So if you're using a smart car, like ambulance kind of a situation, you need data to be sent quickly. There needs to be no or low latency between the data sending, because it really is a life and death situation on the other end. So you needed the data to be sent fast. Then you needed high data rates. So you needed high data rates to transfer. Let's say if you're talking about surveillance videos or footage, you needed high data rates to transfer a bunch of data, the payload, a huge payload that it was. And then you needed mobility, because if you're talking about moving devices, there needs to be a seamless transfer between the network when your device changes in different regions, different networks. So it need to have, like, if you're changing countries, the handover of the network should be seamless. And LTE works perfect for this use case, right? It has all what it needs. But where it lacks is basically the cost. The cost is very high. And also the battery life. Like you might have seen when you switched from your earlier, this was, I think, a few years ago already. But when you switched from your older networks to 4G LTE, or even now 5G, you see that your phone battery literally drains. And with phones, you can afford to like charge it, and then, you can afford to do that, let's say. But with IoT devices, that's something which is difficult to do, because sometimes they're in remote places, they're in places where you cannot reach. They are on journeys which you can access only when they come back. So for all these reasons, and for, let's say, an example like a container tracking device. So you don't need data to be sent that often. You just send, especially for like container tracking, you send a tracking once in an hour, once in some time, like once in a day sometimes, it's fine. You just need to know that the containers are in those specific areas. You need to have them low cost, because usually, I used to work in fleet management, and I know that a pilot project would be 400 vehicles, and then they would deploy it for 3,000 vehicles and 4,000 vehicles and whatnot. So if you're taking this IoT solution and you're deploying it for thousands of devices, you need to keep the cost down, because logistics itself is a very expensive, let's say, operations. And then it also needs to be power efficient, because these devices run on batteries, and your batteries need to last until, let's say, the device comes back to you, or you can charge it, or access it in the end. So for these reasons, we realized that LTE-M was not, it was enough, but it was not what was needed. It was a little too much, I would say. So that's when basically they decided to create this LTE-M standard. And now LTE-M standard, what does it have? So what they did was they basically brought down the bandwidth. You don't need so much bandwidth because you're not sending as much data. So they brought down the bandwidth to like 1.4 megahertz. They brought down the data rate as well, because here sending the data super fast is not essential. So they sent it, they made it down to like up to 1 Mbps. Now they introduced two new features called PSM and EDRX. And what they mean is basically when excuse me, sorry. So when you have a device which, let's say a cellular device, it needs to tell the tower that it is connected to or the network it is connected to that, hey, I'm alive. And so it sends these messages called tracking area updates or TAUs. And it says that, hey, I'm awake, I'm alive. And what happens is sending these messages consumes a lot of power. And what PSM does is, or power saving mode does is, it lets your device sleep in between these two messages. So when your device goes to sleep in these two messages, it's saving power again. And so, yeah, it's making your battery life or battery efficient. And then there is this EDRX or extended discontinuous reception. It sounds super complicated. But what it essentially does is when you send these two I am awake messages, it increases the time between those two messages. So it lets you send them further away, further apart. And so again, in combination with the device sleeping in between with the PSM, and then the messages being further apart, you end up saving a lot of battery life. You end up saving a lot of power consumption. Then the next thing they came up with was coverage enhancement, because here the accuracy was not so important as to the message needs to be sent. It tries a few times to send the same message until it knows it is received. So of course, this affects the battery life, but then you need to adjust the settings in that way. So you have repeated transmissions, which gives you better coverage, even like inside the building, underground, or where there is a lot of, let's say, a metal cage situation wherein your network is not really good. Now, with all these features, the battery life was amazing. Like it can last up to several years. Like I think marketing uses this term, which is like, 10 years of battery life, 20 years of battery life. And you can't put a number on it because yes, it can give you 10 years and 20 years of battery life, depending on how often are you sending data, how much data are you sending, what are your PSM EDRS settings, what is your repeated transmission, like how many times are you trying, and all those things. It depends on that. And of course, you can get battery life up to several years. So that was a great, basically great solution for these devices. And LTE-M, and also I'll talk about it, but also NB-IoT, LTE-M mainly piggybacks on the LTE infrastructure. So it uses the same infrastructure. So you don't have to buy or build a new base station. You don't have to build any more infrastructure. LTE-M can use the existing LTE infrastructure. You just need to connect. And the components used in this, because of the lower bandwidth, etc., what happens is the component cost comes really down. And basically you can get, like if ordered in sufficient quantities, you can get LTE-M modules for less than $10. So what it does is it reduces the cost of these devices tremendously. And then let's say the trade-off here is that the latency is a few milliseconds, again, which is not, or rather, it depends on what use case you're using it for. And so in the use cases that you would use LTE-M, which I will cover later, this is fair. Milliseconds is still fair. And then again, the same with the brother/sister sibling technology, which is NB-IoT. So with NB-IoT, again, they brought the bandwidth further down. So it's 180 kilohertz, 200 kilohertz, depending on what modem you're using, what company. What NB-IoT also can do is it can use the band gap. So between two frequencies, you have this band gaps, and it can also use these band gaps for transmission, which is super cool. And it brings the data rate down to like by a lot. So it is like 125 kbps. It can give up to 125 kbps, but like the normal ones, if you look at Quectel or something, it gives something like 32 kbps or 26 kbps, that kind of speed. So you would use it for examples where the speed needed or the data rate needed is not that high, because you're sending very small amounts of data, like few bytes of data. Again, you have the PSM EDRX mode in NB-IoT as well. And it does the same thing. It lets you sleep, lets the device sleep when it's not sending these "Hey, I'm alive" messages, and it lets you extend the distance between two "I'm alive" or TAUs messages, updates. And the trade-off between PSM EDRX implementing these is your device is not available from outside. It's available when it sends data. But then this is important for saving battery life or the consumption, or reducing the consumption of power. And it's fine if the device is alive when it's alive, so it increases that part of it. And again, the coverage enhancement. So NB-IoT is especially used for like underground usage, where there is some oil pipeline, which you're monitoring underground, or if you have the sub-metering device, which is in the keller of in the basement of your building, which is measuring or taking readings once a month or something of the consumption of electricity and so on. So all this together brings the battery life really high. So it's again, several years of battery life you can get with the proper settings. The module costs have come down to like $8 or something. So like it can come up less than $10. And then the latency, the trade-off here is latency is a few seconds. So with LTE-M, let's say it was milliseconds, here it's a few seconds. And that is specifically designed for the use cases which we've seen in the industry, which we've seen people using in the industry. And so I would say this is my logic of how the Currywurst, which was the fast food or which was designed for that specific use case, might not be as amazing as the whole bratwurst meal, but was nutritious enough. I would say it was nutritious. You get the proteins. So it had enough nutrition. It was fast enough. It was cost effective. It was tasty. The same way LTE-M is fast enough for the use cases it wants with 1 Mbps data rates, but still saved a lot of battery life, still brought down the cost. With NB-IoT, again, the density of data sending is higher, but then because you're not sending data as often, and you're not sending data or huge payloads of data, you have enough transmission rate, you have enough, let's say, speed, but at the same time, you're saving a lot of battery life, you're bringing down the cost by a lot. And so these two LTE-M and NB-IoT standards were basically customized. They read the table, they read the room, what was needed, and it was customized and brought down to what was just needed for that specific use case. So, which is why I think they're similar in the ways they were created. The creation story or the origin story is similar. And so how and why would you use which one? So let's take a few examples, right? So if you're using something like a critical system wherein, hey, you need to, like the device needs to go really fast, the data needs to go really fast and it needs to reach in time, and that kind of a mobility use case, or like a ambulance, whatever use case, you would use LTE because you need low latency. And so in this case, LTE has the lowest latency, LTE-M, it's in between, and NB-IoT has a high latency, and then you would not choose NB-IoT here. But then if you're talking about like battery life or indoor underground coverage, like I said, the sub-metering part of it. So yeah, sub-metering part of it where things are in the ground and you need higher coverage. It doesn't matter, how fast are you sending the data, or if you're not sending like huge, like loads of data, or if it's like a smart button where you're just sending, like when you're clicking it, you're sending the data, and it's not the other way, it's not waiting for a signal. You would then use, and when you need something in between, you would, let's say, live tracking of like humans, you shouldn't do that, but like tracking your dogs and all, you still want better data rate. Then you would go for LTE-M, which has something in between. And then for a underground coverage kind of situation, you would use NB-IoT. So that is how you would distinguish between these three technologies and which one should you use. I wouldn't say either of them is better than the other, or oh, this is the worst for this and this is the best for this. But I would say they're made for specific reasons. So for example, if roaming was very important in your use case, right? So LTE networks have amazing roaming handoffs, soft handoffs, hard handoffs. And so if you have a use case where your devices are going to be roaming and there needs to be like a seamless network handover, you would go for LTE. And even for LTE-M, because like I said, LTE-M also piggybacks on LTE networks. So even there are many roaming agreements with LTE-M on most networks or a lot of networks. So LTE-M is somewhere in between. But on the other hand, NB-IoT you would have to have a separate NB-IoT network from each provider separately. So they're still working out the specifics of how they would charge the customers. And so NB-IoT coverage is not that great right now, but it's in the making. It's going on, and there will be a lot of coverage. But then you would have to have a separate, let's say, identity from each network for NB-IoT. And so that is how, for different situations, you would use different networks. And I would almost say that LTE-M is almost like a franchisee, like a McDonald's franchisee. You have the same one in every place. You have it in most countries. But NB-IoT is this specialty burger places that you would have in every city. Yeah, that kind of a thing. So depending on what use case you want to have, or what your requirement is, this is like a good table to, I mean, this is still a little high level, but this is a decent table that we would give you depending on what your necessary requirements is, what technology you would go for. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about difference between LTE-M and NB-IoT, specific details about it, you can check the Emnify blog. I will put all the links in the chat, but you can check the Emnify blog. There are, I think, 3 or 4 blogs which speak about LTE-M separately, NB-IoT, and then differences, which and why would you choose, details about the data rates and the consumption, the power consumption of different modules, for example, Quectel. So it's there. If you want to test out these, so you can go to the developer hub, so emnify.com/developer hub. And there are these 2 articles where a renowned author about NB-IoT, he talks about how you can take NB-IoT and SIM cards which have NB-IoT and LTE-M available, and you can test them with a Raspberry Pi. So what AT commands do you use? How do you change the RAT types? How do you set PSM EDRX? How do you test it out? So there's a really nice 2 blog posts there, which you can just try. And you can just go to the website and sign up for like free SIM cards and then start using it to see how much of a difference it makes and what use cases it's useful for. And then if you want more details of our products, what we're doing, what features are we introducing, I would say join the developer newsletter. I send out a newsletter every month, and I try to include IoT news from everywhere. So not just our company, but like what is going on. Has Amazon done something new? Has Azure done something new? Which cellular modem manufacturer has something new this time. So I try to fit in a few of those things, but also like tips and tricks to use in your IoT solutions and those kind of things. So yeah, I will put all these links in the chat. So if you have any questions, let me know. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Shruti. If anyone has a question, please write it down on Braille so I can relay it to Shruti.
Meanwhile, I'll send the links.
I will share those links on the Braille as well. So Shruti, we have no questions so far.
Okay.
So I want to thank you very much for being part of our conference. I hope we can see each other again, maybe next year in person. I hope we can do it in person. And yes, thank you very much for being part of this.
Of course, thank you.
I hope you enjoy.
Definitely, I enjoyed this talk and hope everyone enjoyed. And I'll be in Brilla, so if someone wants to reach out to me after this, you can just ping me on the chat in Brilla.
Or they can ping you directly on Twitter as well, no?
Definitely. So I think I had it somewhere behind there. So
yes, and our attendees have your details on the speaker details as well. So yes, thank you very much to you, Shruti, and thank you to everyone who was here attending the talk. See you. Thank you very much.
bye.